Hello and welcome to GoldsQUAD Online. GoldsQUAD is a relaxed and friendly group for anyone over 50 who is interested in creativity, learning new skills and trying new challenges in a supportive environment. Sessions are led by visiting artists and creative practitioners. In this session, Philippa is showing us how to applique some flowers, sharing various techniques of applique and stitches. By the end of the session, you will be able to embroider using fly stitch, blanket stitch, cross stitch and knots in order to apply woolen fabric to a background. To do this, you will need a variety of felt fabrics and woolen fabrics in a colour of your choice, a variety of threads in a colour of your choice, a large piece of felt fabric to use for your background, and some scissors and pins. For more information about GoldsQUAD, please visit www.derbyquad.co.uk and search GoldsQUAD. Enjoy the session.
Out of necessity. So it was something that we did in order to darn and repair. So it was kind of a little bit something that happened all over the world. So if you look through all the various countries, you'll find that in the Far East, in Asia, in Europe, and latterly in the Americas, they all did some form of applique. And that applique started off as something to repair. But what happened next was people started to go, oh, right, well, perhaps we can do something that's really very exciting. So we'll embellish. And applique started to go on its own sort of journey. And people embellished all sorts of different things. So not just fabric, they used to embellish leather on saddles and bags. They would do it on shoes and clothing. So it became something that was a little bit more about a status thing, which oftentimes is the case, you know, with textiles. It starts off as a kind of utilitarian thing and then, you know, becomes this huge big thing. And applique can be done in all sorts of different ways. And I thought I'd just do a quick chat on what those are, and then we'll get on with the project. So I'm just going to put you onto a visualizer, which is the little camera. So just bear with me 1 minute. So I'm just going to, yep, there we go. So little bits of applique then. So what I've done here is I have done little bits of patchwork which I've applied onto some base fabric. So that's one method. So you can make a motif. They oftentimes do that as well, you know, like on uniforms. So with badges and all sorts of other things. Yeah, it's one of those things that they make it somewhere separately and apply it on. Okay, this one is just a little cut out random pieces of fabric, and what I've done on this one is I've used underwear, which some of you might know. It's the stuff that you can use to put the trousers up or the skirt hem up or whatever, and it's really useful. And you can apply then your pieces onto the back of the fabric, and then you iron it on. And we can go through that if anybody would like me to do that. The advantage to that is it stops everything fraying, so you can use and leave raw edges. And that's another little design. Now this one hasn't got bondaware, but I've just left it really loose around the edges. So you basically, just put it a little bit closer, you can see it's more fraying on there. But again, it's a way of applying fabric and then using a stitch to keep it in the right place. There's also ways that you can use what's called a needle turn applique, which is this one, where you cut out a shape and then you stitch round the outside and you round the inside at 1/4 inch, and then you fold under and stitch the actual fabric. And I've done that on this one here. So you see that there's some little stitch lines there, which are tacking stitches. So that's stitched round the shape at 1/4 inch in, and then I've folded using the needle, hence the needle turn technique, underneath so that it actually gets stitched down. And if I just show you on another little project that I'm working on here, so this is a different shape. Yeah. So again, you can see I've stitched round, or stitching round at 1/4 inch, and then I can fold under with my needle and stitch that down in place. So it gives you a very neat edge. it's actually a rather nice thing to do as well, because it's quite therapeutic. So it's something that you could watch, you know, the telly with and just do a little bit of work with. And you can then go on to embellish it further or quilt it or, you know, whatever. So they're the techniques. I've also just got a little patchworky thing here that I did. So these little pieces of felt were cut out using a Sizzix machine, and then I've just stitched them on using various different stitches. So again, you can have some fun with that. And that's really kind of leading us into the little project for this morning. So I'm going to just move that out of the way, and that's the little project that we're going to do this morning. Okay, so what I've done is I've got a base fabric of felt. I've got some different pieces of wool felt that I'm going to, which were knitted. The ones that were in the kit were little pieces of knitted fabric that basically have been partially felted. So by that I mean it's been washed at a reasonably high temperature. You know, worst thing you can do to your kind of sweater moment. And then I've included those in the pack. And if you look a little bit more closely, I've also done some little stitching in between in a sort of camphor style, just to give some texture to it. So don't feel like it has to just be about attaching fabric. You can also then go on to create something that's a little bit more exciting by doing some little running stitches around the outside. Does that feel okay? Yeah, good. Okay, so what you've got in your pack is a sort of a group of different, or hopefully, or you've got for your own resources. These are little bits of knitted stuff that I'd got, and what I'd like you to do is to just go back to the main example. Cut yourself some little triangles, which are going to be leaves, or they can be, you know, leaf shape if you want to. It's entirely up to you. But I felt these little triangles. I'm following a kind of Nancy Nicholson kind of concept with this, and then also some circles, different size circles, yeah, so that you can on these I've got a larger circle and a little small circle. So if you'd like to start just cutting yourself some pieces that are going to go onto the white felt background, that would be really good. And what I did sort of feel like, well, actually there are some templates, but you can just freeform them, and that almost looks kind of nicer. So I've just got some scissors, yeah, and I'm just cutting round, creating a little shape, yeah. So don't be too worried about it. Just be quite, you know, freeform about it. And in terms of doing the little leaf shapes, I've kind of cut myself a little rectangle here. And if you just fold that in half and then cut it kind of where from the middle back up to the end, it gives you a reasonable little triangle. And if it's too big, you can just slice the straight edge off. So put together a selection that will give you something that looks like that. Okay. So I've put 3 lots of petals on, and I've got 3 flowers. If you want to, you could do one big flower and some petals, you know. It's entirely up to you. I guess it depends on how much you want to do this afternoon, with it being a wet afternoon. You can carry on doing this after you've finished. But this is a really nice way to use up scraps, and obviously, you know, depending on what technique or what shapes you decide to cut out, you know, this is a potential for making some really nice cards. You know, so you could, with an aperture in it. It's really nice if you know, for the covers of books and things, you know, or little note case covers, you know, so you can use these. You could do lots of these and patchwork them together, and that would be a really nice idea as well. So it's just about really having some fun with some scraps. Now obviously this is all done with felt, so it has got that, obviously it's a thicker fabric, as you know, to work with. But if you were doing it with kind of more cotton fabrics, then again it's still a really interesting way of embellishing your pieces, and I think it's a really nice technique, you know. So if I go back to the little leaf one that I did, I can just find it. Here we go. So on that one there, it was just little random leaves, cutting out, you know, just cut out of little scraps of fabric, and then just spending some time up doing the stitching on it. And it's just really helpful. I think all of us who do anything that's got materials in it, we end up, don't we, with a lot of bits and pieces that think, oh, what shall I do with that? So if you kept yourself a little scrap pile or bag, and I've applied this onto some old sheeting that I had. So it's like a French, you know, old French sheet. And if you look on the back, you get some quite interesting kind of things as well. So it almost becomes slightly snowflakey, doesn't it, or whatever.
Oh yes.
So yeah. And again, you can also use your techniques to apply the fabric on, but you can change, you know, by just changing the colour of the yarn that you use, the thread that you use, you can create some really interesting effects. And again, it's not very much fabric really. This would work really nicely on calico as well, or on a darker fabric and putting light things on it, you know. So just feel like you can play around with the concept. This also could be done with felt, you know. It could be done with, you know, all of the little scraps that you might have left over. If you think back as well, a lot of the folk-based designs, specifically of mid to East Europe, where they seem to do an awful lot more with felt. And that's not surprising, because felt was something really, really big coming out of Russia and the Urals and so on. And so felt is part of the culture of that Eastern European part of the world. It's also something that seems to happen quite a lot as well in South America. So they have a big felting concept there. Now, part of the felting, I think, comes out of this idea that people used to use felt to create their buildings and their walls and their insulation, because they used the fibres from the animals that they kept. And I think I've bored some of you before about, there's a really good YouTube video on the making of the yurt sides in Russia, where they roll the pieces of I think it's yak fur fleece, roll it up, and then they go on a gallop with their horses, and it gets felted whilst the rolls on the back of these horses are dragged along the ground. So it's, you know, there's a very big part of using, again, what was around at the time. And obviously everything was very much done in the natural fibre colours of the fleece that you were working with. And then as time's gone on, we've worked out how to get colours into everything. And so the idea is that you end up with these really beautiful and vibrant colours. You know, I remember going to Hungary a few years ago now, and that has a huge big culture of using felt as part of what, you know, of their cultural, you know, wearing their waistcoats and bottoms of skirts and little pictures that they did. And again, this is another way that you could do of making the pictures. So it's got a lot of potential to it. And then if I just go back to this little pin cushion, you know, little bits like that, just applied onto a background fabric, and you've got a pin cushion that's using up little pieces of your work, which I think is always very, you know, satisfying really. And they make very sweet little presents, you know, because you've put your time into it, which is kind of really the most precious bit that you've got really, as I've said a lot of times now. So it's good. The nice part about doing this technique is that once you stitch it on, it starts to take a life of its own anyway. So don't worry too much about the, you know, the perfectness of it all. You know, just enjoy the whole process of creating.
And just straight stitches to stitch them on.
I just did like a little overstitch, which I'll show you in a minute, and then I used embroidery threads. So
Okay.
if I go a bit, I'll get a bit closer to it. See, as it focuses there. So I've used a combination of fly stitch and little colonial knots.
Okay.
Yeah. So using stranded threads, which hopefully you've either got or you've got access to.
2 strands.
Yeah, I use 2 strands, but you can if you want to use more. It depends on how much of a statement you kind of want to make. This one here's got the middle one on mine's got 4 strands on it.
Yeah.
You know, it does make a very different effect, doesn't it? So that's the other thing I would also encourage you to do, is to have a bit of a play and see what statement you want to make with it.
And you've got straight stitches on the backing as well?
Yes, so I then, once I'd finished all my embroidery, I decided I would actually fill in and do some almost like camphor work, you know, from India. So I've actually just stitched little running stitches to give a little bit of extra texture to the whole thing.
And did you put the flowers on first, or the stem?
What I did is I did it like this. I don't know if you can see. So I start off pinning on where I want everything to go, and then what you can do is you can either stitch this down or not. It's entirely up to you. And then I did the stems as part of my embroidery.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was just saying that was a combination of fly stitch, straight stitches, colonial knots, and also and stem stitch, and then obviously little running stitches, to create that background. And it does
sorry, Philippa, I interrupted there. Did you do a fixing stitch before you started doing the fancy stitches or not?
I'm just going to say to you, you can do either.
Ah, right, sorry.
No, it's fine. So I have on this left hand side here, I have done a little fixing stitch. I've just used 1 strand of thread, and I've just literally gone round, and I'll show you that. It's already at that point where I could show you how that comes together. Yeah. Okay. So just using 1 strand of thread, and you can use your stranded threads, or if you haven't got that, you could always use just ordinary sewing threads as well. So not a problem. And if I'm just going to start off up here. So I'm just going to come up into the piece of felt, and then I want to go back over. So I'm just doing like a little catching stitch. Because the felt is quite thick, you generally don't see it. I'm using a little bit of grey thread, but use what you've got, because it does disappear. So I'm just coming up into the felt, go down into the white background, and then come up. You see enough there. So down into the felt and come along a little bit. Stitch that in place. So it's quite a nice little activity to do. So if you do it this way, then you end up with something that is quite flat and won't create any edging to it. If you don't do it, and what we'll do is I'll do one with it, just with a fly stitch on it in a minute, without having anchored it down. You get a little bit more of a rustic look to it. Yeah. So that's also quite nice as well.
Okay.
Does that all feel okay with everybody? Yeah. So what I was thinking, it would be good if we attach, have a go at both methods and see which one you like. So if you're at a stage where you've got your pieces now pinned on, or you know where you want them to go, then start to do a leaf, and you can even do the little flowers using this method. I didn't worry about going round my inner circle. I left that. I just went round the outer circle. So if I just go back to this one here. So it does give it a little bit more excitement going on as it sort of slightly is, you know, lifts up slightly the middle circle. Yeah. So just again, have a little play and see which method you like. In terms then of the embroidery, hopefully you've got stitch guide that was emailed to you. There's one here. So I've got, there should be a little stitch guide that's got lots of different stitches on it. They don't all apply for this session, but they do. They apply for the series of things that we're doing. So fly stitch is this little one here, and I find it's quite a useful little stitch to embellish what we're doing here. So I'm using a slightly bigger needle, so I'm using a chenille 22 needle to do my embroidery. You can use a smaller needle to do the stitching on if you want to. And basically, I'm just going to, let's see if I've got it in the right place. Here we go. So I'm going to add some fly stitch onto my leaf here. So I have used 3 strands of this particular stranded embroidery thread. Oops, straight through. So I have got a little knot on the back. Okay, so I'm not being particular about where that knot is, and I'm just going to make 1 stitch and try not to get caught up on all the pins like that, just to make a little center piece. And you can just ease it over with your end of your needle, and then if you come up onto the left hand side, and then I'm going to go over to the right hand side, and it's kind of equal distance between where you've come up on the left hand side and where I'm going to go down on the right hand side. And then you want to do a diagonal stitch which takes you down to the bottom of the stitch that you first did, that first vertical stitch. Okay, and I'm just going to pull that down. So hopefully you can see it, the colour. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
at this stage, this little stitch is not anchored. So you need to do a little anchoring stitch. So just go straight down below the loop that you've made. So it's like that. So can you, I'll wait for it to focus a minute. See, it's like a little loop at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then come up again to the left hand side, a little bit further along from where the last stitch was created. Have your thread coming down this way here, and then go to the right hand side, and we're going to do exactly the same. Can you see that reasonably okay?
Yeah.
Yep, good. So we'll pull that through. Just give it a little tug so it's nice and firm, and then do an anchoring stitch again. Now you can change how far apart you have these, and you can also try and get knots in it like I've just done. And then just pull that down. So you can change the distance of the stitches and how close they are to each other. So if I wanted this one to be a little bit closer, I could come up very close to where that stitch started on that side and put them sitting closer together if I want to. So it really is up to you how much you're enjoying doing fly stitch. So what else could you do? So if you didn't use fly stitch, you could do a little running stitch. So if I just come over into here, so you could just do
What to do?
stitches around the outside, just to hold them in place like that. Yeah. And if I go back to my little pin cushion that I've got here, so you see on here I've got little running stitches here. I've just done some straight stitches to create that. This one I've done sort of more of a straight stitch all the way round it, so you can play around with that. This one is more of a blanket stitch. Should focus in a minute. Okay. So, you know, you can play around with this. I just think that the fly stitch looks rather nice because it's a little bit like veins on a leaf. So that's partly why I've chosen that one. Or you can do a combination of stitches if you want to. So it's just have a doodle really with your needle. And the thread that I've got here is a slightly variegated one. So again, that has quite an interesting effect on it as well. So, or you could put 3 strands of different coloured threads together, you know, and ring the changes with that. And that's really nice as well. So you can just keep working the stitches until you're happy with the design that you've created. So this this little chenille needle does do a nice job for this because it's sharp enough to go through all the layers, and it's got a big eye, so it's quite nice for threading up several strands. The other thing you could also do is you know, you could stitch this with wool. You know, don't feel like it's got to be an embroidery silk, though the embroidery silks do add a little bit of a sheen too. So you see I've just done them quite close together, so you've got a nice little effect. And then if I go back to the first one, I just did little bonds together, and then I didn't worry too much. I didn't come right over to the end. I just did sections in the middle. Okay. So I'm just going to carry on stitching this leaf down for those of you that have just joined, so that you can see the option for this. So I'm just using a single thread, and I'm going down into the white felt and coming up just into the edge of the felt, so that I'm just holding down that edge. The single strand just disappears, so it's not a problem with the thicker felt. If you've got a slightly thinner fabric, then perhaps match your threads a bit more, and that would work. And then the other thing you can do, once you finish this work, if you don't want to get rid of your original design, then there's nothing stopping you taking a photograph of your work and then putting that onto cards, yeah, because it's still made by you, and you can sort of just print them out. So that's another thought. So I've just stitched round this bigger one, and then I've just put a little stitch in the middle of the little one, just to keep it in place, so that I can take the pin out. That's another thing that's worth bearing in mind.
Oh, another holding stitch.
Another little holding stitch, exactly. I'll just cast it off on the back. I think at the moment I'm going to say what I normally say, and that is you're looking at it the closest anybody is ever going to look at it.
Oh, no.
So don't worry, it'll be absolutely fine, and you'll find it's you know, quite pleasant. So a colonial knot was a knot used to make knotted candlewick bedspreads. So what they did is they worked out that the size or the amount of yarn you needed was 5/8 that of what is needed for a French knot. And because the things were being sent out as kits with the yarn and the fabric to the colonies, it became known as the colonial knot. So it's yeah, a bit of interest. I think Belper wasn't the only place, but I'm just doing a little shout out for Belper. So if I've got some wool this time, so I've just used some kind of like wool as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some more somewhere.
And I've done it two strands because this is actually quite fine tapestry wool. So the way to think about the colonial knot then, and I'm hoping, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Just about.
Keep it in the middle though, because if you put it to the more central, that's it.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
So, right. So imagine you've brought your thread up and you've got a little oval here, which I always think of as a smiley face. Okay. And you want to go underneath. Can you see that? Okay, so you're going underneath back to where it's coming out of its hole, and then you wrap round. So you're actually making a little figure of 8. Yeah, and then you go back down the hole you first started. I'm just going to move this out of the way. And then what I usually do is I just tighten. Oh, I've gone too far now. Tighten those threads so that I can then pull that through nice and gently. Okay. Can you see that okay? Yep. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to make my little smiley face, and then I want to go over the top of that loop and go under the thread there. Take the end and wrap it round so that you've got a little, see, a figure of 8.
It's not quite focusing. Oh, there you go. It's focused now.
I'll just hold it there for a minute. Yeah, little figure of 8, and then you go back down into the hole, and then just slightly tighten it and pull through. Okay. So that's the colonial knot. Let me just show you a French knot, just to show you the comparison. So you bring your yarn up, and what I usually do is I have my thread in front of me, and then I wrap it round. So I'm just going to do a couple of wraps round my needle, go back down, and before you do anything else, just tighten that thread, and then you can come back down the loop. Okay. So the colonial knot, when you sort of look at the comparison of it, just wait for it to focus there, it's a slightly flatter knot from the French knot. Could you see that all right? Or shall I do it again?
I would quite like you to do it again, please.
Yeah, that's fine. What I'll do is I'll do it over on this white piece here. You might get a better contrast. There we go. So you've got your smiley face, and then I'm going to go underneath, so over the top of the smiley face and back underneath, so that you've got the thread going over. Then take your other end and wrap it round your needle, so you create like a little figure of 8. Then back down the hole that you kind of first started, and this is where I think they disappear if you're not too careful, is just make sure that you tighten your thread around that needle and then pull through. Okay, and there's your little knot.
Great, thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Lovely.
And the colonial knots are really quite nice to do, whether you use stranded threads or whether you use wool, or whether you use like a cotton perlé or something, because they actually sit quite nicely and flat. So you end up with something that's actually got good coverage compared to the French knot, which tends to be a little bit more upright, doesn't it? And it sort of sticks up a little bit more. So if I'll just do a French knot by the side of it and hopefully we can see. So with a French knot, put your needle down and then you're going to wrap. I'm just going to go around twice, back down, and again just do that little tightening up, that, and pull through. And it's just a sort of smaller, kind of more upright sort of knot. So if I don't know if you can see, perhaps I'll try and do it that way. So on this side, that's the French knot, and there's the colonial knot. So it's a much kind of more openy kind of knot. And it uses less yarn, so that's quite good too. So apparently there were lots of patterns that they would send out all around the world for these thread spreads. And I can remember having one as a child where you used to spend hours picking out the bits out of it, because they were only held there, weren't they, by the fact that you'd wash the fabric afterwards to shrink it to hold the knots in, or the little tufts in place. So I think it was probably the 60s that I remember them most. I think they'd started to disappear, hadn't they, by... So back to this one here. So when I was doing my piece, I came up on the side of my bigger circle, and then I came, over to this side here, and then I came up just onto the small circle.
That's nice.
I use that small, so I use this bit of stitching to hold my circle, little circle down. Pull your fly stitch like that, and then I did a long fixing stitch into the middle. So you can alter the size of your stitch there, okay? And then I just came round again. Oops. So you can just work your way around. You could, if you wanted to get them symmetrical, do a 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'm just going to keep going and not worry too much. So I've come up, just to the right of where I came out on the other side. Do my little V, come up into that little section of the middle circle. Right, and then do a long fixing stitch. So it kind of makes it look a little bit more like stamens or something. Okay. So you can use that stitch to do that. You could, if you wanted to, then do another little stitch in here in the V that's left with a little contrasting colour. So you can spend as much or as little time as you want on this. You can really embellish it, or you could do some little straight stitches or whatever. So I'll just do that again. So come round, come up on the bit of the circle, and then straight down into the middle, just to create a long effect. And the more that you work this, the more the background felt, I'll just go back to my original one here, starts to disappear. So if I said to you, in the middle of my little pink one here, that was some of the felt that I was, the knitted fabric that I was using. you can't see it anymore. You know, it
Mhm.
starts to disappear as you work it. And I think that's what's quite nice about this. The other thing that you could do is you could work some with the stranded threads, which are you know, you've either got or are in the pack, but you could also use you know, some of these variegated, you know, they're machining threads. So you could put a layer of finer threads on the top. And again, you're building up nice bits of texture there so that it starts to become a fabric in its own right rather than a piece of embroidery. Yeah. The other thing you could also do with this, because I've sent, this is 100% wool, well, all of it's 100% wool, and it's not been treated by any particular process which makes it machine washable. The other thing you could also do is you could wash it after you've worked it, and you'll get a nice effect from that as well. So don't feel like you've got to just, you know, stop there. So you could felt the felt, if you like, and that's quite a nice thing to do. So you can distress it to as far as you want it to go, and it will be absolutely fine. So what we haven't done yet then are the little joining up stems. So I'm just going to go back, and so imagining that you've done all of the work on your piece. So I didn't put my stems in till I'd done my embroidery, just because I wanted just to check that I'd got it kind of looking cohesive. So if you have a little look back on my original here, so I put these little pieces of stem stitch in after. Now you don't have to use stem stitch, but the clue is in the title. It does give quite a nice rounded stitch, but you could use chain stitch as well, and a lot of the particularly Eastern European and Indian cultures use a lot chain stitch as part of their appliqué and their embroidery work. So that would be another nice, you know, thing to include. So again, just have a play and see what you like. So if we just put stem stitch in, so I'm going to come up. I'm just going to turn this round so that I can see what I'm doing. So you make a little, so my thread's on the left here. You make a little stitch so that it comes halfway to where you first came out, and you want your thread to be up above. Okay, well, I'm going to put my thread out the way again, make a little stitch, and it comes halfway back to where the threads come out, and pull through. Yep. Put your thread out of the way, make a stitch back, but only halfway, and come through. And you see it gives that kind of quite a nice continuous line that you don't quite get necessarily with a back stitch. So that's stem stitch. Now if we come up a bit there, I'm just going to turn it round again. So now I'm going to have a little go at this chain stitch and just see whether I like that. So come up, and then you're going to go back almost into the same hole, make a little stitch, and make sure that that wraps round. Go back into the stitch where this comes out. Stitch, wrap your yarn round your needle, and come through. So you could, if you wanted to, have another little bit of scrap felt and just create a little sample for it if you wanted to. So there we go. So there's my chain stitch. Now if I just let this focus a minute, you can decide which one. So the chain stitch is generally heavier than, and I've used the same number of strands, but it's quite nice. The other thing you can also do with the chain stitch is you could wrap it with a contrast colour if you wanted to make it more rounded. So you could use a single strand possibly, and then wrap over the top of it. Yeah. So that would be quite an interesting one to do. So, you know, there's lots you can do to build in texture. Does that feel okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm just thinking what would be also good is if I just also talk about this little running stitch camphor background. So you could do this in whatever colour you wanted. I used a cream, which I don't think I've included in the pack, but you could use, and I'm using a perle here, which is a Thinker, which is just a brand name, size 16. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, there we go. It's coming now. But you could use some machine thread and just do several strands together, and that would be absolutely fine. You could use any cottons you could use, or again you could use wool. You know, so you could find a finer kind of wool. And all I did with that was I just did little running. So I just went for a little meander. And what they tend to do in the camphor work is they kind of mirror or create shapes that are there. So I'm just coming around this little triangle. Yeah. So I'm not worrying at all about the length of the stitch. It's small, but it's not huge. Yeah. And it's just, and I don't mind if they're not the same length. I think that's the other thing, is don't worry about that. Just enjoy the process of just stitching. And you see how it just creates like a little puckering, and it just gives you a little bit of texture. So if I go back
lovely.
onto there, yeah. And it's actually quite therapeutic. It's a bit like, in the old days when you used to sort of be on the phone and you doodle, it's that kind of feel to it. I quite enjoy that, and it's a nice way of finishing off your work. The other thing I also did on this one is and I don't know if you can just, just let it focus a minute. I did a little row of yellow stitching just around the outside of those lollipop flowers, just to give it a little bit of focus. But again, not worried about the size of the stitching. I'm not worried about whether it looks rounded or anything. I'm just sitting and enjoying the process of actually making some fabric.